Welcome to today's episode of the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I'm happy you're here. Thanks for being part of this journey where we're exploring consciousness and awakening and psychedelics and deep healing and relationships. And today is a show about relationships. This is a conversation about supporting complex couples and how psychedelics and earth medicines can be a support to the dynamics and the healing process of individuals and couples. I'm here today with Dr. Corvelli. She is the founder of ND Partners Institute. Welcome here today. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, so you have developed ND Compass, and you are working with complex couples, many of which are neurodivergent. And I would love to hear about your approach that helps couples navigate the differences that keep the triggers and keep them tripping up. So the Compass approach has 4 directions, and we're going to talk about those today and how you are supporting couples in your state of Oregon by being present in facilitation of psilocybin and the use of ketamine to support couples who are struggling in these complex areas of life. So I'm happy to have you here today. This is quite a topic.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here and to talk about this. It's such important work. Many people that come to the ND Partners Institute identify as refugees from the traditional counseling and coaching system because they haven't been able to get the right kind of lens on the support they're getting. And so it's really important. Thanks for helping me kind of get the word out.
You know, I'm surrounded by, as probably we all are without even knowing, many people around me that would be considered neurodivergent. Could you just start with what does that even mean? What is neurodivergence? How would you define a couple that you would call complex?
Yeah, and so a complex couple is any couple that is having an extra struggle in the differentiation stage of normal relationship development. And I'll talk in a second about what the stages of relationship development are. But the struggle that these couples have oftentimes is because of their different navigational styles, right? Their different brain styles, which we call neurodiverse, right? When there's more than one type of brain being represented in a partnership. And then the word that I like to use for the individual is neurodistinct, which describes that the preferential style of their neuronavigation is not what's happening in the majority, right? And so their navigational style is in a minority. But we see from nature that diversity amongst styles not only is a strength, but it's a normal occurrence. And so individuals that identify with an ADHD brain or an autistic individual, or even individuals that have had impacts from trauma that has changed the navigational preferences of their brain, are all in this neurodistinct way of thinking or identifying.
So what are some of those traits? Would it be someone who have sensory integration issues where the sensations coming in is a lot to handle, and that may impact the relational dynamic, or someone who's having a hard time processing what someone is saying, someone who's interprets language literally. And then these are some of the things playing out in a couple's dynamic. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Yes. If I think about ADHD brain, right? An ADHD brain oftentimes, and everybody's very different, which is why it's very hard to diagnose, especially adults. But an ADHD brain has features that are oftentimes present, and they're around executive functioning. And executive functioning can oftentimes show up in a relationship because it's inconsistent. Somebody with ADHD brain doesn't always struggle with executive functioning. They struggle with consistency around executive functioning. So how it oftentimes shows up in a partnership is a partner will see their significant other do something well one time and then not do it well the other, and then use the time they did it well as evidence. You could have done it well if you cared. Because they don't understand the nature of ADHD is the lack of consistency and calling for my brain to do something and have my brain respond the way I want it to. Individuals with ADHD also have lower level of neurotransmitters. And so what that means is their brain can be novelty seeking, meaning their brain's trying to do something that it's interested in, so it will get a boost in neurotransmitters, and so it can operate optimally, right? But in a partnership, that may look childlike or lazy, or you only want to do what you want to do, and I get stuck with all the bad stuff, right? And so these are just a couple things that can show up in an
Wow.
ADHD style brain. And
Ooh,
an
say a couple
autistic,
more. This is fascinating. Just give me a couple more. This is really interesting. What about like
partnerships.
organization? You're talking about ADHD, and I know a lot of times people think of ADHD as someone who's not organized, they're always losing their keys, and then there's frustration around that. What are some other traits of even the ADHD or the ADD that do show up so we understand it more, so we can have more compassion
Yeah.
for some of the patterns that we see within our family members or our partners?
Yeah. And I'm happy to share a little cheat sheet on this. Things that are super common with ADHD is individuals with ADHD, one of their superpowers that's awesome is they're oftentimes very present moment focused, which is a really cool way of navigating through time and space, if you ask me. And, the other side of that is their relationship with time is very different, right? It may be a now versus not now type of relationship with time versus a neurotypical individual oftentimes has a relationship with time that's kind of like a number line where they can grade on a gradient, tell where they are through time and space. Well, that difference alone creates a lot of issues in a partnership because someone with ADHD may have a hard time estimating how long it takes to get out. Maybe chronically late, which means they get kicked out of the carpool, right? Or they do what they're supposed to do, but they didn't start it in the correct time window, so it didn't get done within the expected time window. Well, things like taxes, that can be like a real issue, right? Or paying bills. And so you get a lot of chronic triggering where if an ADHD brain is partnered with a neurotypical brain, this sort of chronic lateness or chronic, not starting things on time will chronically trigger the neurotypical autonomic nervous system, right? Because they have this different relationship with time. This issue with time can also be an issue in terms of repairing conflicts. A neurotypical individual will have probably a stronger attachment to something that happened in the past that hasn't been resolved. They'll need to address and resolve a problem before they can get over it and move on. Where oftentimes an individual with ADHD is very present moment. Not always, I'm really stereotyping here, but I'm just going by what I see in my practice. And they'll be like not attached to something that happened in the past. They'll be ready to move forward. And they may be resistant to even get into it. Like, why are we going to kick that up and start fighting again? Like, let's kind of be where we are right now. So all these differences,
And what
really
about
can create.
communication styles? Like, how would someone who's neurodivergent, what are some of the communication styles that would challenge a couple in complex couples?
Well, if we're, continuing to talk about, ADHD, an ADHD individual may struggle with impulsivity, right? And so they may kind of have a fast and loud, response to something. Not always, but, that can show up in communication style. Neurotypical individual oftentimes will come with kind of a sea of evidence of things that have happened because they're very future and past oriented, right? And so they're very focused on all these things happen in the past. Hey, we can predict the future. And so they may come to communication in that way. And we haven't even gotten into autistic individuals, right? Which is another form of neurodistinct. And so if we look at that style of navigation, oftentimes an autistic individual, which I think is the biggest important information when I look at complex couples in which one individual is autistic individuals oftentimes, when they have criticism or anger, oftentimes their nervous system shuts down. It's a biological, reaction. And so a lot of times you get where there's this kind of abandonment theme that their partner may feel because they're shutting down. And then the neurotypical partner will get louder and the autistic individual will shut down more.
Oh, that's fascinating. And
Yeah.
I'm just, as you're saying this, I'm thinking of my daughter. We were mentioning before we started to record that I have a daughter that got diagnosed with autism later in life at 30. And gosh, I wish it would have been really nice to have that knowledge. And I'm sure even for her to have that knowledge of her autism long ago. But as you were just saying that, we used to talk about Kayla and say, like, I'd say something to her as a child and she'd look like a deer in headlights.
Yeah.
And it would be like a sort of freeze because she wasn't understanding what I was saying. And I know she at times like had a way of interpreting things very literally. So if like her sister said, Kel, if you do that again, I'm going to kill you. I mean, that was like a shock to the
Yeah.
system, you know? And so it's interesting to think about how the input is so different. And you were just saying the freeze. So now you're talking about a couple later on in life. But, and you said it's what's happening in the nervous system, that trauma is probably set pretty young, especially when you don't know the neurodivergence or you don't know there's autism there and you're not adapting communication styles, and that child isn't necessarily held in the way of that in that knowing.
Yeah, exactly. So, by the time you're an adult, you have almost a layer cake. You have your brain's natural navigational preference. Then you have your experiences, right? Oftentimes trauma layered on top of it, and anxiety and depression. And so you have all these layers that are interacting with each other. And then you add being in a partnership, right? Which is extremely joyous and extremely difficult all at the same time because you have kind of a constant negotiation between styles of brain. And if we don't have a lens to understand each other's behavior, and if we don't have skill in how to kind of find the Rosetta Stone that allows us to connect, we have a hard time negotiating. And being in relationship is all about negotiating. Each person gets to show up and have their perspective and have their style of being in the world. So having power struggles about whose is right or whose is best is the biggest waste of time and just further traumatizes each partner. We need to get where we can allow each of our styles to be in the room and then skillfully negotiate between them.
Wow. I mean, it's true for everyone. And then I can imagine the complexity when there is neurodivergence or autism, that having those tools is so critical. Because, I could hear a partner say, like, I'm not being heard, I'm not being heard. And then if there is this something, whether it's through ADHD or some way of hearing or way of communicating that actually makes it hard for that person to hear you, or the person that feels unheard. How do you navigate these kinds of things?
Well, with the approach that we use, the ND compass, the whole point of the compass is to create a frame that the couple can adopt, that then they can do their processing and their content in. And the frame creates safety
Okay.
because, usually when couples come to us, that's what's lost. It's not safe. And we have to make it safe first before we can do anything. And so that's one of the things that we work really hard to do is create a frame and create safety. Then within that frame, there's, 4 directions that, need to get addressed and need to get transferred. This is a knowledge transfer over to the couple. So they have this for life. And the first is education. And education has sort of 3 pieces to it. The first is education about your own brain, your partner's brain, and it just creates an expanding of perspective, right? So if my partner responds in a way that's really unexpected and feels like an abandonment or feels invalidating, once I have that education, I can start having maybe some curiosity, right? Actually, maybe it was this, right? my schema, my way of looking at things, that means this. But actually, I'm not married to myself, right? I'm not in partnership with myself. I'm in partnership with this other person. Maybe it means something different when I put on a different lens, right? And so education is about creating that lens, creating a common language. One of the biggest things we hear from partners is it's so exhausting to communicate. Anybody else I can say this to and they know what I mean. I always have to start at square one with my partner. Well, we come up with a common language so there's couples cues so they can get on the same page at the same time. And it's not so exhaustive. So we're expanding perspective, we're creating a common language, and then we're looking at the patterns and concepts that are reoccurring in their partnership. And we use an electronic flip chart, so there's visual learning, and then people can get to recognize these patterns. And then when we're not with a counselor or a coach and they see these patterns happen, they can ground themselves in it. They can say, oh my gosh, this is that thing we learned about. That's what's happening right now. And now they're able to make sense of what's happening. And they have a different response potentially because they're able to track instead of just allowing their nervous system to automatically respond. And so in that education phase, we're trying to put all of that in. And I have to say that from my experience, the education phase is what usually gives the couple a first sort of big boost of energy and hope because it's like, this makes
Yeah, it
sense.
must be a big exhale. Like, whoa, it's
Yeah.
like a veil dropping. I would think too, when you're talking about the triggers and the patterns, right? As we were talking about earlier, a lot of that can come from childhood. So now we have a partner that's triggering something from the past, but then we have the neurodivergence on top of that,
Yes.
or the way a particular brain works. What is the way in which you're trying to educate your couples on the different patterns? Is there a model that you use?
Well, I guess first I want to say, I want to put in there what I see as the stages of normal relationship development, because I want people
Okay,
to
yeah.
really first understand, because I don't think a lot of people have this information and it could be really interesting to them. So first off, every relationship, it's almost like a child where there's milestones of development that are normal and natural. And so a relationship has the same thing. And in the first stage of relationship, it's called the bonding stage. And this is when we first meet. And we have a metabolic thing that happens in us where we don't see our differences as much as we will at a later stage. We have a higher window of tolerance to tolerate the difference. And we almost oftentimes feel like this perfect attachment, like we're one. We're thinking, like we're feeling very together, almost like we're enmeshed and we're one. And for many people, that's an amazing stage, right? It's
Kind of known as the honeymoon stage.
oh yes, it's
Yeah,
wonderful.
everything's perfect.
Yes, and we want to stay in it, but we're metabolically not able to sustain it. That stage is meant to last around 14 months, and obviously everyone is different. But after that stage, we get into the power struggle and differentiation stage. And this is the stage that complex couples have a hard time with because they have these extra layer of challenges to deal with in this stage. And in this stage, individuals need to accomplish three tasks. First, self-differentiation, where they can figure out who they are, what they want, and develop the tolerance to share it with someone else, even if they think that person isn't going to like it, right? Autistic individuals have special challenges because of the concept of interoception and alexithymia. Interoception meaning it can be hard to figure out how I think or feel, and alexithymia can be hard to come up with the words. And so oftentimes with autistic individuals, we need to have some extra time and space and creativity in helping an individual be able to figure out how they think or feel and express it. And so self-differentiation is about being able to accomplish that task, right? And if someone doesn't self-differentiate, oftentimes the relationship can feel really out of balance, like that person's just going along and getting resentful, right? Or not revealing who they are, and the other person's feeling like they're in a relationship with themselves. The self-differentiation is the first thing that needs to happen to get through that hard stage. The second is other differentiation, which means I can tolerate the other person having a perspective, even if it's not mine or even if I don't like it. Instead of constantly doing this power over, power under, or let me educate you why your perspective is wrong, or let's pick which one is best, right? These are all struggles in differentiation. Other differentiation means I can tolerate your perspective being in the room and being valid, even if I don't agree with it. I can show up and hear a conversation. I can be curious. I can invite for your perspective to exist. We'll talk about in a little bit of why psychedelics is such an important tool in this stage for so many people. But that's other differentiation. And then inner differentiation is having a relationship with all of the different parts of yourself. It's inner attachment. It's being able to know there's no one thought or part of myself that fully defines all of me. And so you could see this stage is a big stage, and it's where people usually get stuck. It's where people usually come for help. And so the model that your original question was that we use to help individuals communicate and tolerate these three tests is we equip them with some templates and safety, and we coach them in being able to understand when they're struggling to tolerate. This is when you're working on differentiation. This is when you're doing the work that's going to get you through this stage. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Let's self-soothe. Let's do it anyway. How can we tolerate doing this? Because once they do and they develop that muscle of differentiation, they get to move on to the next stage of relationship, which is conscious relationship, which is when we're enhancing our relationship, when we're doing psychedelics to feel closer, right? To, even explore and be curious even further. So helping a couple get through that differentiation stage is where we put most of our tools to be able to support them in tolerating that work so they can get, through it to the next stage. And then when they're in the next stage and conflict occurs, there's less anxiety. It's not like, oh my gosh, I married the wrong person, or, feeling abandoned, all these things that happen in the differentiation stage. There's a lot of anxiety in the differentiation stage. It's a lot of like, oh, we weren't meant to be together, because people are imagining, oh, if we were meant to be together, it would feel like the first stage all the time. And that's not true. We're not meant to stay in that stage. We're meant to go through all of these stages.
Wow. Okay. So what you just spoke of was the normal stages of development. Not normal. What's the word that we would use? Because I don't want to say normal and...
Well, the typical stages of development, right? Relationships have a growth, and we can't put a relationship back in the bonding stage, just like we couldn't put a baby back in the womb. It's just a normal path. So oftentimes people that are in differentiation don't realize that they're on a normal path. It's okay to be in that stage, and let's figure out how we can help you do the work to be able to keep progressing and not getting stuck.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any clients that you have felt that maybe this isn't workable? Maybe this isn't the person for you, or the way of relating and your preferences are now too far apart. Now that you've left that bonding stage and you've tried, have you had that experience as well?
Yes, I have had that experience. I have to say our statistics are pretty good with most couples that we work with being able to continue to do the work of staying together. But yes, of course, and that's an important decision to make. Couples that are discerning whether I can and want to stay in this relationship, what we try to help them do is to be able to make that decision from a really grounded place, right? And so they're not running from something, but they're running to something that they want instead. And so doing a lot of values work, being able to calm their nervous system, helping them really conceptualize what's happening and what they want, and how they can best align with what they want. This is a big life decision, and being able to make it from those places, feels a bit better. People can have a sense of confidence that they made the best choice for themselves, and they can feel real committed to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, how did you get into this? What
Yeah.
drew you to this particular niche in the field?
I guess a number of influences professionally. Back when I was working on my licensure hours, I was working in the treatment center, and I noticed that there was a overrepresentation of individuals with ADHD, and yet none of the treatment considered or had ADHD education or supportive tools as part of the treatment plans. And so I started adding it in, and I anecdotally noticed big differences, not only in individuals' progress, but also in their capacity to cope with their situation, especially around the topic of shame, being able to make sense of why their brains were seeking out substances and behaviors. And so I started doing education and training at the center and then opened a private practice focused on ADHD. And then I had clients that just didn't seem to totally fit the ADHD diagnosis. And yet they had this ADHD diagnosis. And I came to understand that they had autistic styles of brains. And I still to this day wish I had known what I know now back then, because there were so many people that I just missed it. And so I stopped thinking of myself as an ADHD counselor and started thinking of myself as a neurodistinct counselor to envelope autistic individuals, individuals with ADHD. And then I started noticing that there were two places that were particularly painful that these clients were navigating. First, at their workplaces, because it was creating instability, and specifically at their workplaces, managing relationships, right? Being misunderstood and that being disadvantaged to them, that their actions were being misinterpreted. And then also in their primary relationships. And so I started really focusing on supporting individuals that were neurodistinct in their primary relationships, which also brought me to neurotypical individuals in neurodiverse partnerships, which had their own struggle. And so I really see myself as somebody that's kind of the in between place in representing the neurotypical partner's experience, representing the neurodistinct partner's experience, and having this whole complex couples umbrella. I'm also in a neurodiverse partnership, and I have a very neurodistinct family. And so I also have a lot of personal experience. Some of the people I love most in the world are autistic, have ADHD, and I consider myself a deep, deep advocate of the population, to the point of I can get mama bear crazy.
You said mama bear crazy. I have felt that mama bear craziness and also kind of the mama bear frustration of trying everything and not knowing what would support. I ended up being lucky. I have two children that are neurodivergent, one daughter who is autistic. And I happened to live in a state that had a school that very much catered toward children that were dyslexic. It was out in the woods. They had an outward bound program. There were like 7 children in the class, and I saw that the public school could not handle them. They didn't feel good there. So I was grateful for that place to go. But I didn't necessarily feel like I had necessarily all the answers. We're talking about a whole nother level of understanding that you're talking about now, is really understanding the deep complexity of an individual that is not neurotypical's brain, how they function in the world. And you were just talking about the workplace. That alone, the capacities for the energy that sometimes life takes for someone who is not neurotypical is hard. I see the challenges of my daughter and her comparison sometimes to a sister that doesn't have those things and think, gosh, it's so much harder for me. And she feels understood now, but at a time when she was younger, trying to make the markers of like what is typical, what is expected in the world, felt really, I'm sure, much more challenging. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that was what you just said. I felt it in my heart. And I think, I guess I have a couple things that I can share that come up for me around that. First is how beautiful it is when people have enough sources of information and nourishment, places that they can regularly rely on neuro-affirming information and shares and connection and community, that they can become advocates. And anybody that has, had any kind of neurodistinction and navigated the school system has had to have an advocate. It is a tough thing
Brutal.
to navigate in a school system. And I could tell you a lot of stories.
One of my hardest moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And teachers don't get the education that they need and the support that they need. And so, being an advocate and filling your world with sources of nourishment. And then I also want to call out that heart thing that I felt and the heart thing that I think I felt from you, that, I don't know if you identify as neurotypical or how you identify, but individuals in this space that are in relationship with a neurodistinct individual also have their own form of trauma, in terms of seeing the world is going to be hard here, or you're getting underestimated. You're not presenting yourself in the first minute. Somebody has to get to know you to see all the amazing aspects of you. And that's a disadvantage in a world that people are making a 1-minute decision. I mean, there's tons of ways. And so supporting, people in relationship, right, with neurodistinct individuals also important, which is frankly what oftentimes ketamine can be so supportive, because ketamine regenerates dendrites that have been filed away from trauma. Ketamine supports memory consolidation, which is all these experiences maybe we've had in the education system or that we've had in which our loved one has been disenfranchised. And it helps that, body of memories not affect us and trigger us in the present moment for at least a long enough period of time where we can rewrite those neural paths. And, oftentimes we are our partner or our child or, our friend or family member's biggest advocate. And so we need to take care of ourselves as well.
Let's talk a little bit about memory reconsolidation. It's something I see in my own work and my own medicine work. And I am curious why you feel ketamine in particular is a medicine that can be really helpful with that, and what you've seen and how it's used. So maybe first let's define what memory reconsolidation is.
Yeah. So memory reconsolidation is, our brain's very important function of gathering a database of experiences that then inform how we're going to act in a moment or how we're going to prepare ourselves in the future. It's particularly a topic amongst individuals with PTSD, right? Because memory reconsolidation contains those experiences that have been traumatic that then show up in the present moment and limit someone's responding, right? Because they show up in the moment and they activate a nervous system response. And so the individual can be re-experiencing their trauma in the present moment because of this memory reconsolidation function of the brain. And ketamine, which is a dissociative anesthetic that was developed during the Vietnam War because it's very safe, it's very fast acting, you come out of it quick, it doesn't suppress your breathing the same as other anesthetics. Also, it does that by acting on the glutamate system of the brain. And alongside it being used in that way, I believe it was Yale knew that it acted on the glutamate system, and the glutamate system was indicated in depression. And so they started doing research about using ketamine to treat depression with, really good results. And so there's a really strong research base for ketamine around being used in an off-label way to support individuals with depression and also to do this work, such as with PTSD, in terms of tamping down the memory reconsolidation impact on an individual so they can get a foothold on rewriting those neural pathways.
So one way, just so maybe someone listening could understand, and just correct me if I'm wrong on this, one way that memory reconsolidation can be done in a session would be, someone takes a psychedelic and that memory is coming up about an incident. Maybe there's shakes in the body, maybe there's some physiological response to that past memory coming up in the present moment. And part of that memory reconsolidation then is to also provide the need that wasn't given at the time. So let's say somebody felt trauma in a classroom, trauma from something. It's what did you need? What was the safety? And then giving that kind of in the session what wasn't given at the time, whether that was love, compassion, holding a hand, just a word of you're safe, or maybe a core belief at that time was wired in, like, I'm not good, I'm not smart, I'm this. Is it to rewrite that memory is to then at the time when that memory is coming up in the medicine space to then provide a new lens, like, you are really smart, you are incredibly beautiful, and bring compassion to that time. Is that how you would look at memory reconsolidation as well, or no? Is that something different?
No, you're exactly right. The medicine helps you tolerate the work, right? It turns the volume down on the memory reconsolidation experience in your nervous system so you can do the work of tending to the need of having a different, response, of having a different narrative around it. And so the ketamine supports the volume going down so the work can happen. If you don't do the work, then you haven't changed anything, right?
Right.
So it's
Right.
important that,
You're just kind of continue to bring these memories up.
yes.
But if then that other piece isn't incorporated into the memory reconsolidation, you're just kind of retriggering on the same cycle. How would you compare, just to jump for a second, but I do want to come back to the ketamine, your work with psilocybin compared to ketamine with memory reconsolidation and with these complex couples? Is it the same? Is there one of these medicines that you like better? And if so, why?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm just so glad we have them both. Oftentimes it's interesting. I see neurotypical individuals benefit from ketamine and neurodistinct individuals benefit from psilocybin, but not always. Everyone's
Interesting.
just very different. I think that, ketamine has a lot of research around memory reconsolidation and about refertilizing the dendrites and giving an autonomic reset or around neuroplasticity. And it is shorter acting. So it's something that
Somewhat of an
maybe,
easier journey.
yes. And it's great for psychedelic naive because it is, like you said, it's the easier journey and you can get into a very kind of meditative space. You're not going to have as many visuals with sublingual, especially, in my work, sublingual into a meditative state where we're turning down the volume on memory reconsolidation, turning down the volume on protectors using an IFS, and then doing the work. And so ketamine offers, a lot of maybe I would call control. I don't like that word, but the one that's coming in terms of using that ally. Where psilocybin is the beautiful, medicine that offers, I just believe, amazing perspective shift. I just think psilocybin, Jung feels that the majority of us is unconscious. What 80 to 90% is unconscious, and then only 10 to 20% of us is conscious. I feel like psilocybin just gives this beautiful journey into those parts of us that we are deeply connected with, this inner wisdom concept, but we can't access. And we come out of these journeys just feeling so connected and aligned. And I mean, I had an autistic individual come out of the journey and they were like, I know what I want to eat. I know the colors I like and what I like to eat. And I spent time with every single person that I truly love, dead and alive, with like being able to access these parts of ourselves and how that brings this expansion to our perspective. And, we can't unsee that. We can't unknow that. We can't unlearn that. And of course, psilocybin, the research is supporting, also has this neuroplastic reset which is so important. We need more research. I mean, the parts of the brain that psilocybin impacts, the default mode network, right? The DMN, highly implicated in autism and ADHD. The neurotransmitter, especially serotonin, highly implicated in, autism and ADHD. So it really stands to reason that all these parts of the brain that are reconnecting would really support neurodistinct populations.
There's another new science out too that, these medicines aren't just working on the things that you just mentioned there, but also the extracellular matrix structure. And I was like, wow, it's really the entire whole being that these medicines are working on. I have a question about psilocybin because, again, you were talking about ketamine, which can kind of soften everything. It's a dissociative anesthetic. And then when we think of psilocybin, we think of it as something that amplifies, right?
Yes.
So it's almost these different tools. Have you ever had a client who, with psilocybin, some of those neurodivergent aspects of them are amplified? For example, a client that has, let's say, OCD, all of a sudden on the psilocybin, have that be really amplified in the session?
That's one of the reasons why I think all of us working in this space have to have impeccable ethics and really do our upfront work to make sure clients have the support system and the tools to be able to navigate and integrate after. We don't want to open up anything and make people more vulnerable, especially in a relationship, without them being able to navigate if that's the outcome. Oftentimes, that's an important outcome of being able to have that brought, the defenses taken away and the underlying primary emotion or primary problem coming forth. But then we can't just leave people in that state. We need to support them through that, which is, I think, one of the ways that Oregon will grow in terms of kind of tightening up the before and after stages of, facilitation that's happening right now. There's big opportunity to get better at that.
Yeah. And I didn't want to make that sound like a negative either, because that is also, it can be a negative if, as you just said, not supported and not supported in the integration. And if the facilitator doesn't know how to navigate that in the session, it can also be like a deeper understanding of, look at how my brain works. Wow. Why? Oh, wow. I've been wired for this is like a safety thing. Mm-hmm. When I feel safe, I don't have to check the doors and make sure I'm safe in this room and ask you where you're sitting and ask you to do this and perseverate. I can relax a little bit. So it's just fascinating how these medicines work.
And how are we going to respond when we're feeling unsafe?
Exactly.
Avoidance is one thing, right? But there may be other things. What other things can we do to really meet our body, feel safe? And I just think being curious is just the answer for everything. If we're curious, we can learn so many things. We can just love when somebody learns that lights make them feel unsafe, or their dog licking them or barking. It's like, wow,
right?
So good to know. Now we have lots that we can do, right?
Yeah, I think the curiosity, and then, which psychedelics also do, expanding our ability to sit with something that's uncomfortable, and then coming back to our bodies. I think, like, again, as Westerners, but also if there's oversensitivity or sensory integration, the body's not that comfortable to be in. And so also having the ability to kind of notice what's coming back into the body and allowing our body to be that compass, which I think a lot of times with neurodivergence, that the body gets shut down because it's not that comfortable to be there. I'm curious. I think you're so lucky to be in Oregon. Let's talk a little bit about these places that have opened up in Oregon that allow you above ground to be in relationship with couples, to go there. How does that work? And tell me what you're seeing. This is like the frontier of the psychedelic movement.
Yeah, it's really great. I feel lucky to be here, and we're learning a lot. It was pretty expensive for these people to make this investment. It's a brave space because oftentimes, getting insurance and doing all the things you need. And so I'm just so grateful for all the people that kind of took that risk and went into that brave space to create these service centers. I love that the service centers have a real sense of community, of we're helping each other, we're supporting each other. There's a lot of sharing of trying to collect data so people can learn and we can support the rest of the country as they come online
So
and help
needed.
people, do things better. So what's, basically involved is individuals get certified as the facilitator. They go through education and experience and, pay money to the state and have this certification. And service centers get certified. And then there's growers. And so those are kind of the ecosystem. And individuals connect with the facilitator either through a service center or through a lot of different, other ways they find us. And they go to a service center. They have preparation, right, which is required by the state, and get ready to take the medicine, set intention, do everything you need in order to get in the right
Kind of a
mindset.
warm, cozy setting.
Of course, yes.
Yeah,
Get
good.
ready to, connect and partner with the medicine. And then go to the service center. Most service centers have very cozy, different themed rooms that you go in with your facilitator. Most offer a menu of different types of psilocybin. So you can, really pick the one that's going to be, best for what we uncover about you during assessment and what you typically experience with medicines. Oftentimes neurodistinct individuals or people that have been on any kind of stimulants or antidepressants need to take higher doses. And then, you take the medicine. We found that taking it in tea or some way of squirting it coming on quicker is what's best. Then there's an opportunity for a booster after 45 minutes. And, then you're in your space with your facilitator, having your journey. And then however length of time, you're in your space. Most people are wearing eye shades because it's really supporting above ground and having an inner experience, where a lot of us that have done it underground in nature, right? It's sometimes a very visual experience. And so doing it above ground in a service center oftentimes is not so much that, it's much more an inner experience. Your guide will support you in terms of music and support you along the way, whether you need a blanket. There's discussion about touch and consent about touch. As you know, in this space, there's been some terrible things that have happened historically because people are vulnerable. They don't have a sense of agency. So the state has been really great about making, laws to protect people so that does not happen. And then afterwards, either gentle integration at that point or, some point within the next 48 hours. And then people really get to decide how they want to integrate their experience, whether they want to go to a therapist, whether they want to keep working with their facilitator. It's really individual.
So for you, when you're working with couples, do you find that you work with a couple with the medicine and then also potentially individual sessions also supports this process, and it's not necessarily a one and done, that this is kind of an ongoing for some time period for couples?
I think it depends. How I think about it is I think about it in terms of what stage of relationship are they in. Now, if they're in stage 1, the bonding stage, or stage 3, the conscious couple stage, oftentimes they're using the medicine for relationship enhancement. And so a lot of the stuff that we may do is up front, giving them really cool exercises or things they may even want to do when the medicine's first hitting them in order to enhance their connection or experience of each other. And so the preparation and integration will be about that. The integration will probably be much shorter. It may be just a couple sessions to, get them started. But oftentimes there's a lot of safety in those couples, and it's about more upfront
Curiosity. And
Yeah, right.
that's kind of
Helping them,
cool. Yeah.
helping them have the experience they want and adding some tools in
So
their tool bag.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. If a couple is in that middle stage, the differentiation stage, then they have very different needs. The first need is safety. How are we going to do this safely? It's going to be in an open state. We can, we need to be really conscious and, again, impeccable ethics around that. And so, putting that frame, the ND Compass frame, is something that I insist because I know that it creates safety. And so learning those basic ways of talking to each other, those basic ways of expanding our perspective about each other, some, basic information that we now have a language of more safety. And then really talking about the pros and cons of journeying together or journeying, individually or journeying in the same space, but individually. Some people are nervous or anxious about a journey and being able to support someone microdosing and someone taking journey. And so really figuring out what is going to help you in where you are and where you want to go, and really tailoring an experience that's supportive of that. And that couple will need more integration
Yeah.
afterwards in order to really make sense of what their experience was.
So you had talked about kind of that first stage was like education. So are you educating couples on even like nonviolent communication and internal family systems and kind of the process of different techniques of like imago therapy and different techniques of relating? Or have you kind of just developed your own tools based on your work?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking it. Yeah, this is, a body of work, kind of my life's work I'm an integrative therapist. This is an integration of evidence-based best practices. This is Eric Burns' transactional analysis, Dick Schwartz's IFS, Shapiro's EMDR, Linehan's DBT, acceptance and commitment therapy. They're theoretically integrated well, right? Some theories don't integrate well. So I do know how to do that. They're integrated well. And the ND Compass has 4 directions. It has education, it has differentiation, it has niche construction, and it's autonomic reset. And so within each of those 4 directions, there is a weaving of these best practices that have been, put a complex couple lens on them, a neurodiverse lens on them to be able to, like, for example, EMDR. EMDR can be really hard for a neurodistinct individual. So we have a lens on that of how can we make it more accessible. So that's what this NT Compass is.
What was the last one? What was the last piece of the 4? Yeah.
Autonomic reset. That was the last direction that was added, because I'd see couples working so hard and doing all the right things, but their nervous systems just continually showed up.
Totally.
And it was so terrible where one person would show up ready to go, open and vulnerable, and the other person's nervous system would go off, which would be a contagion. And then this could go on for weeks, months,
Right.
years, right?
Right.
And so it really became, hey, each person has to have a plan. And how I think of autonomic reset is this. I feel like there is self-surrender methods, things like EMDR, mindfulness, somatic body work, amazing, right? Self-surrender. And then there are surrender assist methods, things like ketamine, psilocybin, right? That are supportive in allowing protectors to quiet down. And so it doesn't matter to me, what path someone, picks. It matters that it's really accessible to them, because autonomic reset is not something we can just know intellectually. We need to actually experientially lead ourselves, self-leadership, right, through it in order for our bodies to really have a reset.
Such an important piece of the picture.
Yeah. It's big.
Wow. Yeah.
And I didn't get to talk about niche construction, but I'll just explain it because it's a funny term. It's a term.
I'm curious about that.
Yes, it's a term from biology, and it's what describes how a species sets itself up for success. So like a spider building a web, or a beaver building a dam, or a bird migrating, right? And so they're niche constructing their environment to set themselves up for success. And so we support a partnership in niche constructing their relationship.
Love it.
This goes not only with romantic partners, but also family systems. And what that means is we're putting certain basic rituals that you have to do for life in order for each person to be able to feel safe and get their needs met. And those practices are around connection, communication, and conflict. And so many times and I've experienced this in my own partnership. Remember, I'm in a neurodiverse partnership too, is things start going really well and there's energy and people start having what we call the salvation fantasy of I'm cured, right? Now we know this is generalized into, our relating and we don't have to have these practices. And sure enough, there's always going to be a dip. And I just tell people there is no salvation fantasy. You need to do this for life because even if you're feeling organically connected to your partner, chances are your partner may not be having their needs met. The conversation about what's happening in your workday is great, but it doesn't necessarily reveal the inner world and have the depth of conversation that your partner may be needing in order to feel connected. So in niche construction, we also talk about finding each other in the airspace. So it's this concept of knowing where each other is and being able to clean the airspace, meaning when it gets dirty, we have the words to say, hey, the air feels dirty. Can we have a conversation? And then having kind of a recipe about how we have that conversation. Autistic individuals especially love having a recipe. Like, yeah, don't make me guess. Tell me what works, and then I'm going to become an expert in it,
Right. Oh my gosh, this is fascinating. So do you work with families? Do you work with mother, son, mother, daughter, or mostly couples right now?
I mostly work with couples, but I certainly have worked with families, mothers and parents and their
Parents
offspring.
and
Specifically around differentiation is really important, especially around parents and children being able to kind of redefine your relationship and kind of get rid of that enmeshment that can happen when you're a parent. And it's super powerful. And also around some of the niche construction practices, being able to communicate where there is really a speaker and a listener instead of two speakers is that's another place where people get this big boost of, oh my gosh, that felt so different to actually be listened to instead of the other person plotting what they were going to say the whole time the other person was speaking. It's really amazing if you look at popular culture, how we see constant models of speaker-speaker dialogues. We don't see so many speaker-listener dialogues. And we actually have a rubric that people can have a dialogue and then self-assess. How did I do? Where am I on this rubric?
it's so funny you say that because again, I'm just thinking of like my own family at times. I remember saying we should have a speakometer. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, there's certain people that take up so much space of speaking. Maybe it would just like, maybe they're not even aware of it. Like maybe they don't realize that like if it goes all blue, nobody has talked for an hour except them.
I think you're talking about our ADHD friends. I don't know. That's my guess. But that's
Oh
one
my
of the
goodness.
things too in working with people in a very respectful way. I ask upfront, may I have your permission to interrupt you if I see a pattern or a dynamic that doesn't seem like it's serving the intentions you told me well? What would that be like for you if I interrupted? And so up front, learning the ND compass frame, it's very active, right? There's a lot of, hey, can we go back? Hey, could we pause and take a look? Or, hey, let's look at the slide. I wonder if this is what's happening. Does this resonate with you? So when people are learning the frame up front that way, and then after they learn the frame, I'm not even present. Sometimes I actually disappear myself where I'll take my bit. I'm like, I'm here as your consultant, but it's important for me that now this conversation is between the two of you. I have no intention of becoming a part of your marriage or your relationship. So this is about a knowledge transfer, coaching, so you get this. And now I'm here as a consultant. And then we decide, you've accomplished your task. You're done with me. You now have this. Use it. Don't be afraid to use it. I never want a couple to come to me just to process the fight of the week. I
No.
don't want that. I want them to have the tools so they can do it with confidence. Not always going to be comfortable, but once they have the plan and they can do it, it's something to have for life.
Now, going back to the psychedelic piece, in your practice, these new places in Oregon are new. What are you noticing as far as outcomes adding psilocybin and ketamine?
I can only, rely on my own experience. A lot of service centers are collecting data, but we really don't have a lot of information. This is a big need. And, in terms of just understanding what the outcomes are. I know that I have clients fill out measures before and after. So, I can understand what's happening. What I'm seeing is the same as what the research is coming, that most people have really important, powerful experiences and their perspectives expand. People oftentimes say that they felt their nervous system reset, right? That they have a higher window of tolerance. Sometimes anxiety is kicked up because they're now feeling their primary emotion. For instance, instead of just going to anger, they're feeling unsafe or afraid, or sad. And so I wouldn't say that's a bad outcome. I'd say that's a good outcome, but it can be an uncomfortable, outcome. Again, so
I would say
supported.
that that's actually familiar to me, having been very psychedelically naive when I came into the psychedelic space. And then after a psychedelic experience, thinking like, whoa, what are all these feelings? Kind of when you're used to navigating your life with certain emotions and not really aware of the other ones. That it was kind of interesting to suddenly feel a little anxiety or something. And I was like, wow, psychedelics intensify your emotions. But the reality is they've always been there. I had adaptive strategies. But
Right.
what it was helpful in is it helped me not bypass those emotions and help me understand more. Oh, there's anxiety here. Why? What's happening for me in this space? How have I learned to shut down when actually maybe the appropriate or more positive thing for me to do is actually use my voice in this setting? So it's interesting. It's so nuanced, this experience with psychedelics and what we get to see, the experiences of people. It's always different, but
So true.
it's beautiful.
And yeah, and many people, travel into Oregon to have these experiences. I have clients that come in from out of state to have these experiences with me. And I always say, try not to travel the next day, because that's always somebody that's done that myself. It's really grueling and painful. And I highly recommend not doing that, really giving yourself, especially the day after, to just settle in and allow this experience to kind of continue and notice and be with them in a gentle way without all of the stimulation of travel.
So important. As a matter of fact, I just want to add here, because again, it's new science. It's from Dr. Gul Dolan's work. Each psychedelic has this, it's called the critical period. And it's like reopening you to child mind. So a child is so absorbent, everything is new. And it was her work with you giving MDMA to octopuses that this critical period is opened for a significant amount of time after a psychedelic experience. So for example, for MDMA, that critical period is 2 weeks. So if you're in child's mind for 2 weeks, if you go back to your job that's highly stressful, or your relationship that is actually the relationship that is retriggering your child patterns of trauma, it's actually having the opposite effect, having that psychedelic and then going back into that space. So with each psychedelic, ibogaine, they're saying is like a month. Ketamine, I think they're saying is 2 weeks.
2 weeks
to 30 days. So it's just another really important thing to understand as facilitators. And I'm sure Oregon is telling people this, but just not only don't travel, but make sure you're surrounding yourself in, I almost look at it like ambiotic fluid. If we're going back into like the child, like putting yourself in the safest setting that you could possibly be in, where that memory reconsolidation, you're around people that support you. You're around people that give you the needs that maybe you need during that time period. So important.
For sure. I'm so glad you
Yeah.
brought that up. This comes to the impeccable ethics, right? Of really setting people up for success. If you experience ketamine and go to a dance club, you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything to, maybe you had an enjoyable time. But not only did you not do anything, but you also potentially opened yourself up to
Harm.
expand your
Totally.
harmful right behaviors. And so it's so important to understand why you'll find me not only at the Nancy Partners Institute, but also to Catharsis. And you'll see that, especially on to Catharsis, which is the psilocybin work I do, I kind of feel that I'm at the sacred and science, right? The intersection of sacred and science. That's where I want
Absolutely.
to live, because I think they both inform this work so much. They're both big pieces of the picture.
Totally. Totally. In the science, we don't necessarily talk about the intuition, and actually, even as a facilitator, intuiting what's going on in the space and then teaching somebody else how to come deeply into their own intuition. And I totally agree with you. Being in that intersection of those two is so important. And I love that you're talking about the importance of impeccable ethics in this space. Like, who is right for this work? Sometimes it's not for everyone. How do we know? Do we have enough time and space to assess that as people in this space? Like, we're looking for healing and at minimum to do no harm, and being so careful with, especially in the medicine space, so important.
Yeah, it really is.
Mm. Anything else that we didn't talk about that you'd like the audience to know?
Well, I'd like to share some of the offerings that we have. You can find them on ndpartnerscompass.com. I'm starting to do free Compass Zooms. I'm kind of in process of writing a book with all of this in there. I do trainings, but it's really hard to get the word out sometimes. And this can really make a difference. Sometimes a big difference, a little bit can make a big difference. So I'm going to be offering, I don't know if it'll do it every month or every 6 weeks, where I'll just have a free Zoom and people can get on and I'll teach them a piece of the compass and, answer questions, have discussions. So they can find access to that on the ndpartnerscompass.com. Also
That's so
have,
wonderful too, just because I think it adds to a sense of not being isolated in this work, which I think is really
yeah.
important for couples and individuals to feel like, oh, I'm not alone. There's a Zoom call here of people that I can connect with and hear some of their experiences.
Oh, and there's such good company. There are so many people that have this struggle. I wish they could all meet each other and just see,
Right?
wow, I'm in really great company. There are a lot of amazing people that, are engaged in this struggle. I also have a group for women in complex couples that'll be using ketamine assisted work. It's starting in May with Zoom prep, and then the experiences in Oregon in June. I have a group for complex couples using psilocybin in September. Again, the preparation and integration will be on Zoom, but the experience will be in Oregon in September. And that's all on the ndpartnerscompass.com website. And then on ndpartnersinstitute.com is where we do our work. We're mainly doing adjunct work now, where someone maybe have worked with a therapist, be working with a therapist, and come to us for up to 6 sessions to learn the compass or to do autonomic reset work or to do EMDR or something like that. And they get a free 30-minute handoff on either side, right? And so if your therapist is sending you to us, you have us for 30 minutes, either with your therapist or just, whatever combination, to figure out everything that you've done, because we want to leverage it. We want all of this life experience and work you've done to all come into the room. And then you have
Right.
30 minutes at the end to figure out how you're going to go back and keep processing your content with this frame now that you have. So we do that adjunct work. And then, of course, I do the psilocybin work at twocatharsis.com, which is not licensed work, right? I'm a licensed individual in New Jersey, Washington, and Oregon. So there's work that I do under that license. And then there's work that I do not using that license that's strictly under my facilitator's license. So it's a little complicated, but it's really
Yeah.
important that people know which role I'm in. So I really, want there to be, a really good understanding of what role I'm in and what that means when I'm in that role.
Yep. So I'm just curious, going back to your personal life and being in a complex partnership, could you share a little bit about what comes up in that partnership? What tools have helped you? And have you and your partner done ketamine together or psilocybin? Would you talk a little bit about your own personal journey in this?
Sure. Thanks for asking. I'll give you an example from my life that some people will probably really chuckle and maybe identify with. I remember feeling really low and down and saying to my partner, him saying just like, "Oh, how are you doing this morning?" Right? It's very consistent in that way. Actually, I'm really down. I don't actually remember ever feeling this low. I'm actually scared. I'm so low. And he looked at me with a deer in the headlights and then left the room. And so I had a lot of feelings about that, right? And days went by and there was a coldness in between us, right? Because that's my superpower defense is, to get cold and all that to passively let my partner know what I'm thinking. And then I finally,
Alone and abandoned,
yes,
unheard and unseen.
exactly. And then I finally said to my partner, I am so pissed. It's been 2 weeks. I told you I was at one of the lowest times in my life, and you walked out of the room, and then you never even went back, right? It's been 2 weeks now, and I'm just so upset. And he said, it hasn't been 2 weeks. It's been 10 days. That was his response. And it's funny because at any other time in our lives, that would have been it, right? I'd be apartment shopping and that would probably play out over 3 months. But I was just like smiled. Because I understand how his brain navigates, right? Is his first navigation is to sort things into good, bad, right, wrong. And that was inaccurate, what I said, right? It was 10 days. It wasn't 2 weeks. And so his brain kind of uses that to gauge how bad is this? Well, it's not really 2 weeks, it's 10 days. And so there's a little bit of hyperbole. So maybe it's not as bad
It's not as bad.
Right. So this is how his brain is relating, to it. And then me having that knowledge from all the education, the work we've done, instead of, saying something really
right, because that is almost even from that place of wounding, that's even more dismissive. Like, not only are you not seeing me and not hearing me, now you're correcting me.
Yeah, right. And I said, I can appreciate that that's your first kind of response. Can you have a more relational response right now for me? That's what I really need from you. And, he was able to do it. Right. He was able to sit there, get himself together. And he was saying, okay, we got to get back to the compass. Let's schedule, a relationship meeting. Let's use the IDI methodology. And he said, because I want to do that for you. And you're right. It's like, I'm afraid. And my first response is to use my base level of, accessible, navigation. I'm like, I can appreciate that. I was like, I feel better already knowing we're going to talk about this. And so my partner and I, this has been a 25-year journey for us. And we have ups and downs and ups and downs. And I have to tell you that the ND compass always brings us back. And we have probably every 3-year fight about him not wanting to use it because he feels organically that we're good enough. We don't need to be so regimented, and just doesn't work without it. Because with it, we have our connection. I have my connection needs met. He feels safe because I have kind of boundaries and rules about how we're going to talk. And so I'm not frightening him all the time by my nervous system being triggered. And it just works. So, like, why wouldn't we just continue to use it? We also have a very neurodistinct family. And it's amazing because of all this education and these ways we talk to each other. It's just so fun. We kind of all love each other and honor each other's styles. Sometimes we kind of poke fun at them. And my family's now pointed out about, Mom, you're the one that gets really dysregulated with people chewing. And you also don't have any facial recognition. So, they're like, you have many more autistic traits than you're realizing.
You're letting on.
So I'm like, I'm open to anything. I may have some discovery in my future. I don't know. So it's been really important, for our family, and especially having women in the neurodistinct phase, which are underrepresented, being able to allow, support them and accessing resources and make sense of what things are hard in their world, especially around academia and college, middle school, really being able to make sense of their world, their experiences with perhaps social anxiety, their experiences with criticism, their experiences with feeling how they shut down in the face of anger or other people's energy. To me, it's the funniest thing how individuals feel like this misnomer of individuals that are autistic are not empathic. My experience is they're overly empathic. They're extroception. They can feel everybody's energy in the room.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
And so,
Yeah. Extra sensitive.
yeah. So it's been really amazing.
Maybe I see both. I think I see both. I see
Of course.
extra sensitive, and then maybe even extra sensitive made them shut down. So I don't know. But thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So fascinating. And I'm wondering, is MDMA an option or no? Are the only options right now ketamine and psilocybin in Oregon? Because I imagine that would be an incredible relational help.
Oh, it's going to be so big. And also for our autistic individuals, specifically around social anxiety, we're expecting that MDMA will probably follow the ketamine model and be available within the next year. And so that's going to be, it's available. There are research studies. Anybody that wants to participate, there are research studies you can get in with and use those medicines. But yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be, and I really look forward to having that as another ally in this work.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do. And I'll put all of your information in the show notes. And maybe the next time I'm out in Oregon, I'll come out there and check out one of these facilities.
That would be
Good
great.
to see you.
Yeah, thank you,
let's stay in touch.